Dombey sat in the corner of the darkened room in the great armchair by the bedside, and Son lay tucked up warm in a little basket bedstead, carefully disposed on a low settee immediately in front of the fire and close to it, as if his constitution were analogous to that of a muffin, and it was essential to toast him brown while he was very new. Dombey was about 48 years of age, Son about 48 minutes. Dombey was rather bald, rather red, and though a handsome, well-made man, too stern and pompous in appearance to be prepossessing. Son was very bald and very red, and though, of course, an undeniably fine infant, somewhat crushed and spotty in his general effect, as yet. On the brow of Dombey, time and his brother Care had set some marks, as on a tree that was to come down in good time. Remorseless twins they are, for striding through their human forests, notching as they go. While the countenance of Son was crossed and recrossed with 1,000 little creases, which the same deceitful time would take delight in smoothing out and wearing away with the flat part of his scythe, as a preparation of the surface for his deeper operations. Dombey, exulting in the long looked-for event, jingled and jingled the heavy gold watch chain that depended from below his trim blue coat, whereof the buttons sparkled phosphorescently in the feeble rays of the distant fire. Son, with his little fists curled up and clenched, seemed, in his feeble way, to be squaring at existence for having come upon him so unexpectedly. "The house will once again, Mrs. Dombey," said Mr. Dombey, "be not only in name, but in fact, Dombey and Son. Dombey and Son." And this is from Dombey and Son by Charles Dickens. A rather thick book. And a rather good book. I mean, it's definitely Charles Dickens, so it's got some corniness about it. But it's a very serious Charles Dickens book. And it's about a businessman who basically cares about nothing else but business, and that's how he runs his family and his life, like a business. And soon enough, his wife here was going to die, and his future wife he'll treat like a business proposition and so forth. I mean, this is obviously being critical, Charles Dickens being critical of the culture of the time and how the market economics and new capitalism of that century in England created business everywhere, right? It's that type of thing. It doesn't... In ways, this book is completely irrelevant to modern times, but in many ways it's not. Or in many ways it is. And where it essentially is the same is there's still a lot of relationships like that. People treat friendships like businesses and things like that. But I think some of the characters in the book are rather irrelevant to today and wouldn't make much sense. But that's by the by. I think what I want to get at here is how Charles Dickens sets up these characters. And it's a lot of comparisons. There's several comparisons going on in this passage, and there's a lot of symmetry, right? It always starts by talking about Dombey, the older gentleman, who's 48 years old, and then talks about the newborn baby, his son, who is 48 minutes old. And the son is capitalized throughout the passage, which is not, it's not a proper noun. It's certainly not in this sense the way it's, well, if you were to rewrite this passage, you would write it the son, right? The son was very bald. The son about 48 minutes. And the son lay tucked up warm in a little basket and so on. But Charles Dickens is making it a proper noun on purpose. He wants to highlight the idea that this is not necessarily a human. He's just that name that's on the wall of the business, Dombey and Son, right? This is like a company, an incorporated company, INC or a CO, and it's like Dombey and Son Incorporated, Inc. You would say in America, INC. And so that's how this is being treated. This is just, these are two parts of that business, right? And the older Dombey used to be the son in the name Dombey and Son before he took over the company from his father. And so he's long awaited this this event, this long looked for event. He's been waiting for a child, a boy. Remember, he's 48. That's pretty old to wait for an heir, so to speak, to your property and business, things you're going to bequeath to the next generation. And of course, it would have to go to a son in this time and age. And so every single paragraph up to here is essentially starting off with Dombey and then talking about Son, right? And the comparisons are very similar. So let's just get started. Dombey sat in the darkened room in the great armchair. Great, big, old. The Son lay tucked up in a little basket. Okay. And that's just one. And then we have the age, right? The 8 and 40 years, the 8 and 40 minutes. Dombey was rather bald, rather red. The Son was very bald, very red. It just changes the adjective, but it's the same exact thing. And though, of course, an undeniably fine infant, somewhat crushed in its body, right? An undeniably fine, though a handsome, well-made man. However, right? There's a however statement. The same for the child. An undeniably fine infant, followed by a however statement. It's all very symmetrical in the comparisons. And there's a few interjections here and there. I want to go back up to this one. I really like this one. This is a simile, but it's it's quite cute. Let's think about this. The Son lay tucked up in a little basket bedstead, carefully disposed on a low settee immediately in front of the fire and close to it. So a rug, essentially. There's a rug in front of the fireplace, and they've pushed the rug up as close to that fire as they can get to keep the baby warm. And if you think about a muffin, muffins are wrinkly little pieces of bread, right? Kind of, you toast a muffin. It's very cute. It's just a simile. But it's constructed in a strong way. His constitution, what does that mean? That's essentially his whole body, right? That's how they would say his entire body in this proper old-fashioned sense. His constitution. We're analogous to that of a muffin. Analogous is a word, analogy. It means drawing a comparison, right? Pause. I need to pause. So, that's a cute little thing, right? It basically tells you this is an analogy, but an analogy is typically something that it's like fish to water, bird to sky. They're both animals. They're both in environments. They're very close in comparison. A muffin and a baby are very far away in comparison, so it's more it's a bit of an oxymoron in a way to say it's analogous, but whatever. I mean, I'm being really picky, and it's done on purpose by Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens' style, there's a lot of times when he actually tells you the technique in the writing, right? He often says things like analogy or apostrophe. He apostrophized the clock. Basically, spoke to the clock like it was a human being. He often uses the terms of technique in writing in the writing. which is, I don't know, is that like breaking the fourth wall? Who knows? And then it just kind of goes on like that, right? It just goes into these direct comparisons between father and son. This is so quintessentially literary, artistic, across time. You always compare the father to the son. It's just been done 1,000, possibly 1,000,000 times, and Charles Dickens just continues with it. He doesn't break any new ground here in this passage, and he's not really trying to. But there's some other things here that are very Dickensian in style. When we get down here to, on the brow of Dombey, the old man, time and his brother care. So what is time and care? Why are they capitalized? Why have they become proper nouns? Because this is very much drawing on, I guess you would say, the classical influence of literature and art, on the classical influence on later European style. And time is personified, right? It's become a proper noun because we think of time as like this ultimate truth, and all things lead to it, and so it becomes a character itself. And care, I suppose, is not a very common one, but it's there as well. So we're talking about time and his brother care had set some marks, all right, as though they're humans, they're personified, and they do this to the man. And this is very Dickensian. He likes to go off on little tangents and make little remarks. I mean, it's not necessarily only him that did this during this time of writing, but it's definitely cliche and old in style, but it's interesting. So time and care, they're twins, remorseless. They never stop, right? No one can defeat them. And they're striding through their human forests. So another comparison is being made here. Humans, like living on Earth, are just a forest of trees. And as a lumberjack would cut down a tree, I guess maybe making notches in trees as he goes, or making a record of how many trees he's cut down for the day, time and care do the same thing, supposedly. I'm not sure how care does this, but I'll take Charles Dickens on his word. So it's just this little interjection, but there is a reason for having this interjection, because it kind of sets up a bit of foreshadowing for what happens in the book. And essentially the son is kind of born feeble and weak. The son is set up as a feeble and weak character who will die, and that of course is going to throw a giant wrench in Dombey's vision of Dombey and Son as another generational business to pass on. And so Dombey didn't want a son for the sake of having a son and enjoying the fact that he has a son. He wants a son to just essentially take up the name in the business and be the business, because the business is what matters, not the relationship between the father and son. And that becomes drastically clear as the book goes on, that it's not about the relationship for Dombey, it's about the business. And he just puts all his expectations into that, into his son, rather than putting all his love into the son. So there's a lot of foreshadowing going on here, because although it's directly talking about the father, it kind of goes into the sun in the same way, right? Because then it goes, while the countenance of the sun, the look of the sun, was crossed and recrossed with 1,000 little creases. And if you think about a baby, this is also a very time-honored thing in literature. Babies they look old when they're born. They're all wrinkly. And very soon they become smooth in the skin. But when they're first born, they all look wrinkly and kind of old. It's kind of strange, right? It's like that. And this has always kind of struck people as odd. Like, how can you look old the day you're born? Right? It's like, here's a glimpse of what you will look like when you're old before you die. Right? You come into the world looking the same as you're supposed to go out. You look old, you die old, wrinkly, and creased. And so it's this comparison drawn out, right? The old father looks older because time has put his stamp on the father. But the son also looks old because he's just a newborn baby. And that is very deceitful, right? It's very deceitful of time to do such a thing. I don't know what's going on here. Okay. And time is going to take delight in smoothing out and wearing away the flat part of his scythe. So the scythe is that thing that death carries, which I guess death is being compared to time here. He's going to smooth away. He's going to cut away these wrinkles for now, as preparation for what he'll do later through experience. It's a strange image, and I guess it strikes Charles Dickens enough that he likes to write about it. But again, he's not saying anything groundbreaking here. I mean, this is something that was done in classical literature. I'm talking about Greeks and Romans, especially Greeks. So he just brings it into this story as foreshadowing for what's going to happen in the story. Okay, and then we have this passage about Dombey exulting in the long looked-for event while he jingles his heavy gold watch chain, which depends from him. Instead of hangs from his suit, it depends on him, right? The business depends on him. The gold, the money depends on him, right? He is the business. And so all of its sparkly gold buttons, phosphorescent, are dependent upon him. And so when he dies, there needs to be another dependent to take up the mantle. There has to be the son to take that up. But these feeble rays in the distant fire goes directly into the sun again, right? In his feeble way, right? That comparison is very subtle, but the fire has different intentions for this family that Dombey cannot see, and would never consider at this point in time. But the son, with his... My computer is just not cooperating today. The son, with his little fists curled up and clenched, seemed in his feeble way to be squaring away, right? It's a boxing reference for having come upon him so unexpectedly. And so a baby, I guess, holding his fists up because he can't do anything else with his hands. It's almost like this child didn't want to be born. He didn't want to be born into this situation. So he is fighting existence from the very beginning. Again, it's just foreshadowing. And then we get into that excitement of the father about his business, not necessarily his son, right? It doesn't even talk about... When it says the house will once again be not only a name, but in fact, Dombey and Son, he's talking about the business, not necessarily the house of the family. House is a way to describe businesses in England at the time. Maybe it still is, I don't know. But he's not talking about the house they live in. He's talking about the business. And so, yeah, this was a very interrupted little analysis. But there you go. Charles Dickens, Dombey and Son. Take care.